Why Some People Feel a Soul and Others Feel Nothing at All by David Russo. Have you ever wondered why some people describe an inner presence they call a soul, while others search within themselves and find only thoughts, emotions, and memories? For some, the soul feels undeniable, a quiet voice, a source of meaning, a connection to something deeper than ordinary life. For others, the idea feels distant, almost like a language they were never taught to speak. This difference raises one of the most fascinating questions about human experience. Why do some minds seem to discover a hidden depth within themselves, while others experience the same life without feeling that invisible connection? Introduction. The idea of the soul has fascinated humanity for thousands of years, across cultures, religions, philosophies, and personal experiences. People have described an unseen part of themselves that feels deeper than thoughts, emotions, or physical existence. Some speak of the soul with complete certainty, sensing it during moments of love, grief, beauty, creativity, or quiet reflection. Others encounter the same concept and feel no inner recognition at all. They do not necessarily reject the possibility of a soul. They simply do not experience the feeling that others describe. This difference raises a profound question about the nature of human consciousness. If the soul were a universal and obvious part of experience, why would people perceive it so differently? One person may feel an unmistakable inner presence guiding their choices and shaping their identity, while another may experience life through thoughts, emotions, memories, and actions without sensing anything beyond them. Understanding this contrast requires looking beyond simple beliefs and exploring the many forces that shape how people experience themselves. The answer may involve a combination of psychology, neuroscience, personality, childhood development, culture, and the human search for meaning. Our brains influence how we reflect on ourselves. Our experiences shape the way we relate to our emotions, and the environments we grow up in teach us what parts of our inner world deserve attention. The feeling of having a soul may not be a single experience shared equally by everyone, but rather a complex interaction between biology, interpretation, and personal awareness. This does not prove that the soul is merely an idea, nor does it confirm one specific explanation for its existence. Instead, it invites a deeper exploration for why human beings experience their inner worlds in such different ways. In the chapters that follow, we will examine how the mind, emotions, development, culture, and personality influence the way people understand themselves. The question may not simply be why some people feel a soul and others do not, but how different minds learn to recognize the mystery of being alive. Chapter 1. What people mean by soul feeling. Before asking why some people feel a soul while others do not, it is important to clarify what people actually mean by the word. Surprisingly, there is no universal definition. For some, the soul is a spiritual essence that exists beyond the physical body. For others, it is simply the deepest part of their personality, the place where values, emotions, identity, and purpose come together. Because people use the same word to describe different experiences, conversations about the soul often become confusing before they even begin. Many people describe a soul feeling as an unmistakable sense of inner presence. They may experience moments in which they feel connected to something larger than themselves, whether that is nature, humanity, God, or the universe. During these experiences, everyday thoughts seem quiet. replaced by a feeling of profound clarity, peace, or meaning. These moments often become defining memories because they feel more real than ordinary consciousness. Others use the term in a much more psychological sense. Their soul is not a supernatural entity, but an inner voice that guides decisions and reflects personal integrity. When they say they are listening to their soul, they may simply mean they are paying close attention to their deepest values rather than immediate desires or social pressure. In this sense, the soul becomes a metaphor for authenticity rather than a separate spiritual substance. At the same time, many people genuinely do not recognize any of these experiences. They think, analyze, remember, and feel emotions, but they do not perceive an additional layer beneath those processes. Their inner world may feel entirely cognitive, with no distinct sense of a hidden essence or spiritual presence. This absence does not necessarily indicate emotional emptiness or intellectual limitation. It may simply reflect a different style of consciousness and self-awareness. Recognizing these differences is essential because the debate often begins with a misunderstanding of language. When one person says they feel their soul, they may be describing intuition, emotional depth, spirituality, moral conviction, or profound self-awareness. Another person may search for the same sensation while expecting something entirely different. Before exploring why these experiences vary, we must first appreciate that the phrase soul feeling is not one experience at all, but many different experiences gathered under a single powerful word. Chapter 2. The brain's role in an experience. The feeling of having an inner self is so familiar that it often seems automatic. Most people move through life with the impression that there is a stable I behind every thought, memory, and decision. Yet, neuroscience suggests that this experience is not produced by a single location in the brain. Instead, it emerges from the coordinated activity of many interconnected networks that continuously integrate perception, memory, emotion, and self-reflection. What feels like a unified inner presence is the result of an extraordinary, complex biological process. One of the most important systems involved in self-awareness is the brain's default mode network. This network becomes especially active when the mind is at rest, daydreaming, remembering the past, imagining the future, or reflecting on personal experiences. During these quiet moments, the brain naturally turns inward, constructing a narrative about who we are and how we relate to the world. Individuals whose brains more frequently engage in this kind of introspection may develop a richer sense of an inner life, making experiences that are described as soulful feel more familiar and meaningful. At the same time, people differ significantly in how their brains process internal and external information. Some individuals naturally spend more time observing their thoughts, emotions, and bodily sensations, while others direct most of their attention toward solving problems, completing tasks, or responding to their environment. Neither style is inherently better than the other. They simply represent different cognitive preferences that influence how a person experiences consciousness. Someone whose attention is consistently directed outward may rarely notice the subtle feelings that another person interprets as evidence of a soul. Research also suggests that the brain constantly creates models to explain its own experience. When a person feels awe while standing beneath a star-filled sky or overwhelming compassion during an act of kindness, the brain seeks an explanation for these powerful emotions. Some interpret these moments as encounters with something spiritual, while others understand them as natural psychological states. The emotional experience itself may be remarkably similar, even though the interpretation differs according to personal beliefs, cultural background, and previous experiences. Understanding the brain's role does not reduce the mystery of human consciousness. Instead, it reminds us that every inner experience passes through the remarkable machinery of the nervous system. Whether one views the soul as a spiritual reality, a psychological construct, or an open philosophical question, the brain serves as the medium through which that experience is perceived. Differences in neural organization, attention, and self-awareness may therefore help explain why some people feel an unmistakable inner presence while others experience only the ordinary flow of thought without attaching deeper significance to it. Chapter 3. Emotional sensitivity versus emotional blunting. Emotions shape far more than our moods. They influence how we experience ourselves. For many people, the feeling of having a soul is closely connected to moments of profound emotion. Deep love, overwhelming grief, gratitude, wonder, or compassion can create the impression that there is something within us that extends beyond ordinary thought. These experiences often feel too meaningful to be explained by logic alone, leading people to describe them as touching the deepest part of who they are. Others, however, experience the same events with less emotional intensity, making the idea of a soul feeling much less familiar. Emotional sensitivity exists on a broad spectrum. Some individuals are naturally more responsive to emotional experiences because of differences in temperament, genetics, and brain function. They may be deeply moved by music, art, nature, or acts of kindness. Small moments that others overlook can evoke powerful feelings of connection, purpose, or beauty. Because these emotions are vivid and enduring, they often become intertwined with a person's understanding of identity, reinforcing the belief that there is an inner essence guiding their experiences. On the other end of the spectrum are people who process emotions in a quieter or more cognitive way. This does not mean they lack feelings or empathy. Instead, they may experience emotions with less intensity or prefer to understand them through analysis rather than immersion. Faced with a breathtaking sunset or a moving piece of music, they might appreciate its beauty intellectually without feeling the overwhelming emotional response that another person describes as spiritual. Their internal world is no less real, but it may be organized differently, emphasizing observation over emotional absorption. Emotional blunting can also develop over time rather than being an inborn trait. Chronic stress, depression, anxiety, burnout, and certain medications can reduce the intensity of emotional experiences. Likewise, prolonged exposure to hardship may lead the mind to dampen emotional responses as a form of self-protection. During these periods, individuals sometimes report feeling disconnected not only from other people, but also from themselves. They may describe life as flat or emotionally distant, making concepts such as the soul seem abstract or inaccessible. Importantly, this state is often temporary and can change as mental health and life circumstances improve. Recognizing these differences helps us avoid simplistic conclusions about who does or does not possess a rich inner life. Emotional intensity is only one dimension of human experience, not a measure of depth or humanity. A highly emotional person may naturally interpret their feelings through the language of the soul, while a more reserved individual may find meaning through reflection, curiosity, or reason. Both approaches reveal different ways of engaging with life, rather than indicating the presence or absence of a soul. Emotional sensitivity may simply influence how people recognize, interpret, and describe their deepest experiences. Chapter 4: Childhood and the Formation of Inner Voice. Long before people begin asking philosophical questions about the soul, they are learning something even more fundamental: how to relate to themselves. Childhood is the period during which the brain develops its earliest understandings of identity, emotion, and inner experience. Every conversation, comforting embrace, disappointment, and moment of encouragement contributes to the construction of an internal world. Whether a child grows up feeling connected to the world or largely disconnected from it can influence how they later understand concepts like the soul. Children whose emotions are acknowledged and discussed often develop a strong inner dialogue. When a parent asks, "How did that make you feel?" or encourages a child to imagine, reflect, and express themselves, the child gradually learns that their internal experiences matter. They begin to recognize subtle emotions, conflicting thoughts, hopes, fears, and dreams are meaningful parts of who they are. Over time, this reflective habit can become so natural that adulthood brings a vivid sense of an inner self that feels stable, personal, and deeply authentic. Imagination also plays an important role. Young children naturally create stories, invent imaginary worlds, and assign meaning to everyday experiences. Families and schools that encourage creativity often strengthen a child's ability to think symbolically and explore abstract ideas. These habits of mind make it easier later in life to appreciate metaphor, spirituality, and concepts that cannot be directly observed. A person raised in such an environment may find the language of the soul intuitive because they have long been comfortable exploring realities that extend beyond the purely physical. Not every childhood provides these opportunities. In homes where survival, discipline, or constant responsibility take priority, children may learn to focus almost entirely on the external world. They become skilled at solving practical problems, meeting expectations, and managing daily responsibilities, but they may receive little encouragement to explore their emotions or inner thoughts. This does not mean they lack depth or imagination. Rather, their attention has been trained toward action instead of reflection. As adults, they may find discussions about the soul unfamiliar because they were rarely invited to explore that dimension of themselves. None of these developmental pathways determine a person's future permanently. Human beings continue growing throughout life, and many adults discover a rich inner world long after childhood has ended. Therapy, meaningful relationships, meditation, creative expression, education, and significant life experiences can all deepen self-awareness. Likewise, someone raised in a highly reflective environment may later adopt a more practical outlook. Childhood lays the foundation for the inner voice, but it does not write the entire story. Our relationship with ourselves continues to evolve as we encounter new experiences, new perspectives, and new ways of understanding what it means to be human. Chapter 5: Culture and the language of the soul. No one develops an understanding of the soul in isolation. From the moment we are born, we inherit a culture that provides words, stories, symbols, and beliefs for interpreting our inner experiences. These cultural frameworks influence not only what we think about the world, but also what we notice within ourselves. A feeling that one society describes as spiritual awakening may be explained in another as an emotional breakthrough, a psychological insight, or simply an ordinary human experience. The experience itself may be similar, while the interpretation differs dramatically. Religious traditions have long provided language for experiences that are difficult to describe. Christianity speaks of communion with God. Islam emphasizes the purification of the soul. Hinduism explores the eternal Atman. And Buddhism examines the nature of consciousness and the self from a different philosophical perspective. Although these traditions differ in important ways, they all encourage people to pay attention to their inner lives. Through prayer, meditation, ritual, and reflection, believers learn to recognize moments that feel spiritually significant and to understand them within a larger worldview. Cultures that place greater emphasis on scientific reasoning and material explanations often encourage a different perspective. Rather than viewing powerful emotions or moments of awe as evidence of a soul, they may interpret them through psychology, neuroscience, or evolutionary biology. Neither approach necessarily diminishes the experience itself. Standing beneath a sky full of stars can inspire wonder whether one sees it as a glimpse of the divine or as a natural emotional response shaped by millions of years of human evolution. The difference lies in the explanation, not always in the feeling. Language also shapes perception in subtle ways. When a culture has rich vocabulary for describing inner states, people become more skilled at recognizing and communicating those experiences. Words such as serenity, transcendence, contemplation, reverence, and compassion allow individuals to distinguish between emotional nuances that might otherwise remain vague. In contrast, when a culture focuses primarily on measurable outcomes, productivity, and external success, people may spend less time exploring experiences that resist simple definition. What cannot be easily measured may gradually receive less attention, even if it continues to exist in human experience. Recognizing the influence of culture reminds us that the feeling of a soul is not formed by biology alone. Every person interprets life through a combination of inherited traditions, family values, education, and social expectations. These influences create different mental lenses through which the same inner experiences are understood. Rather than proving that one culture is correct and another mistaken, this diversity suggests that human beings possess remarkable flexibility in making sense of their inner lives. The language we inherit does not determine everything we experience, but it profoundly shapes how we recognize, describe, and ultimately understand ourselves. Chapter 6: Intuition versus Analysis. Human beings do not all think in the same way. While everyone uses both intuition and analysis to some degree, most people naturally lean toward one style more than the other. This difference influences how they solve problems, make decisions, and interpret their inner experiences. For some, a quiet feeling carries as much weight as a carefully reasoned argument. For others, Conclusions are trusted only after they have been examined through logic and evidence. These contrasting approaches can shape whether the idea of a soul feels immediately real or remains an abstract concept. Intuition is the mind's ability to recognize patterns without conscious, step-by-step reasoning. It draws on memories, emotions, experiences, and subtle cues that the brain processes automatically. Many people describe intuitive moments as sudden insights or an inner knowing that arrives without explanation. Because these experiences often feel spontaneous and deeply personal, they are frequently interpreted as the voice of the soul, consciousness, or a higher form of wisdom. Whether those interpretations are spiritually or psychologically accurate remains an open question, but the experiences themselves can feel remarkably convincing. Analytical thinkers tend to approach the same experiences differently. Rather than accepting a feeling at face value, they often ask where it came from, what evidence supports it, and whether alternative explanations exist. A sudden intuition might be understood as subconscious pattern recognition instead of spiritual guidance. An overwhelming sense of peace may be viewed as a natural emotional response rather than a glimpse of something beyond the physical world. This habit of careful evaluation does not make analytical individuals less thoughtful or less capable of profound experiences. It simply means they interpret those experiences through a different intellectual framework. In reality, intuition and analysis are not enemies but complementary ways of understanding the world. Many important discoveries begin with intuitive insights that are later tested through careful reasoning. Likewise, emotional wisdom often helps people navigate relationships and moral decisions in ways that logic alone cannot achieve. Individuals who integrate both styles may find themselves appreciating the richness of subjective experience while remaining open to critical thinking. Such balance allows a person to explore questions about the soul without either unquestioningly accepting every feeling or dismissing every mystery. The diversity of human thinking reminds us that the absence of a soul feeling does not necessarily indicate the absence of depth. Some minds naturally seek meaning through symbols, intuition, and inner impressions, while others seek it through observation, evidence, and careful analysis. Both approaches have strengths and both have limitations. The experience of the soul may therefore depend not only on what a person feels, but also on the mental habits they have developed for interpreting those feelings. Understanding these differences encourages curiosity rather than judgment, allowing us to appreciate that different minds may arrive at different yet equally sincere understandings of the same inner reality. Chapter 7: Trauma, Protection, and Emotional Distance. Not everyone who struggles to feel a deep inner presence is naturally disconnected from themselves. In many cases, emotional distance develops as a response to difficult experiences rather than as an inborn characteristic. The human mind is remarkably adaptive, and one of its greatest strengths is its ability to protect itself during periods of overwhelming stress. When pain becomes too intense or too frequent, the brain may reduce emotional awareness as a way of preserving daily functioning. What appears to be emptiness may actually be evidence of an extraordinary survival strategy. Trauma can affect the way people experience both themselves and the world around them. Events such as abuse, neglect, violence, Serious illness, loss, or prolonged insecurity can change how the brain processes emotions and memories. Some individuals describe feeling detached from their own thoughts, as though they are observing life from a distance rather than participating in it. Others find that emotions become difficult to identify or express. In these circumstances, concepts like the soul, inner voice, or spiritual connection may seem distant, not because they are impossible, but because the mind has learned to prioritize safety over deep emotional engagement. This protective distance is sometimes called emotional numbing or disassociation. While these experiences exist on a spectrum and are not exclusive to trauma, they illustrate how the mind can temporarily limit access to intense feelings. A person may continue working, studying, raising a family, and meeting responsibilities while privately sensing that something inside feels muted. They may remember once feeling wonder, joy, or profound connection, yet struggle to experience those emotions in the present. Such changes can lead people to wonder whether they have somehow lost their soul, when in reality they may be experiencing the lingering effects of psychological protection. Recovery often involves gradually rebuilding trust in one's own inner experiences. Supportive relationships, psychotherapy, creative expression, mindfulness practices, and time can help individuals reconnect with emotions that once felt inaccessible. This process is rarely quick, and it is seldom linear. As healing progresses, many people report that their sense of identity becomes clearer and their emotional lives richer. Whether they describe this change in psychological terms or as rediscovering their soul depends largely on their personal beliefs and cultural background. But the renewed sense of inner connection is often unmistakable. Understanding the relationship between trauma and emotional distance reminds us to approach these differences with compassion rather than assumption. A quiet inner world does not necessarily reflect a lack of humanity, sensitivity, or spiritual capacity. Sometimes it reflects a mind that has endured more than others can easily see. The absence of a strong soul feeling may therefore be less about what a person possesses and more about what they have experienced. As healing restores emotional openness, many individuals discover that the inner depth they believed was missing had simply been waiting beneath layers of protection all along. Chapter 8. Personality Differences in Inner Depth. Even when people share similar childhoods, cultures, and life experiences, they can still differ remarkably in how they experience their inner world. One reason is personality. Personality traits influence how we perceive reality, respond to emotions, approach uncertainty, and search for meaning. These differences are not signs of superiority or deficiency. Rather, they represent natural variations in the ways human minds engage with the world. Understanding personality can therefore shed light on why some individuals readily speak of the soul while others rarely think about it. One of the most widely studied personality traits is openness to experience. People who score high in openness tend to be curious, imaginative, reflective, and receptive to new ideas. They often enjoy art, philosophy, literature, music, and abstract thinking. Many also report moments of awe, wonder, or transcendence more frequently than those who score lower on this trait. Because they are comfortable exploring uncertainty and symbolism, they may naturally interpret profound experiences through the language of the soul, spirituality, or personal transformation. People who score lower in openness are often more practical, structured, and focused on concrete realities. They typically value consistency, clarity, and evidence, preferring explanations that can be observed and tested. This does not make them emotionally shallow or incapable of meaningful lives. In fact, they often excel at building stable relationships, solving practical problems, and maintaining dependable routines. However, they may be less inclined to describe ordinary experiences in mystical or symbolic terms, making the concept of a soul feel less personally compelling. Other personality traits also shape inner experience. Individuals who are naturally reflective may spend considerable time examining their thoughts and emotions, developing a rich internal narrative. Those who are highly conscientious may focus their energy on responsibility and achievement, while highly extroverted individuals often find meaning through relationships and social engagement. Likewise, emotionally resilient people may interpret life's challenges differently from those who are more sensitive to stress. Each combination of traits creates a unique way of experiencing both the external world and the private landscape of the mind. Recognizing the role of personality encourages humility when discussing the soul. A person who feels deeply connected to an inner essence is not necessarily more enlightened than someone who does not. Likewise, a practical thinker who prefers evidence over intuition is not necessarily missing an important part of being human. Personality simply influences where our attention naturally goes and how we interpret what we find there. The remarkable diversity of human character suggests that there is no single universal path to self-understanding. Instead, each personality offers its own way of discovering meaning, purpose, and identity. Chapter 9. The Mind's Need for Meaning. Human beings are not only creatures that experience life, they are creatures that interpret it. The mind constantly searches for patterns, connections, and significance. We do not simply observe events, we ask what they mean, why they matter, and how they fit into the larger story of who we are. For some people, this search for meaning naturally moves inward. They find purpose through spirituality, personal transformation, intuition, or a sense of connection to something greater than themselves. These experiences can become what they describe as a relationship with the soul. The feeling may come from a deep desire to understand existence beyond everyday concerns and to locate a sense of identity that feels larger than the physical self. However, meaning does not always take a spiritual form. Many people create a meaningful life through knowledge, relationships, creativity, achievement, service, or the pursuit of truth. A scientist studying the universe, an artist creating beauty, or a person dedicating themselves to helping others may experience profound purpose without describing it as a soul. Their sense of fulfillment may come from discovering patterns, contributing to something valuable, or building connections in the world around them. The human need for meaning appears universal, but the ways people satisfy that need can be incredibly diverse. The feeling of having a soul may therefore represent one pathway through which humans organize meaning. It is a framework that allows some individuals to connect emotions, values, memories, and hopes into a unified sense of self. Others may create that same unity through logic, philosophy, personal goals, or relationships rather than through an inner spiritual presence. The difference may not be that one person has meaning and another does not, but that they construct meaning using different mental languages. The soul may be one of humanity's most powerful symbols for describing the experience of being a conscious, purposeful individual. Chapter 10. Is the difference real or just perception? One of the deepest questions surrounding the experience of the soul is whether the difference between people reflects something genuinely present in some individuals and absent in others, or whether it is simply a matter of perception and interpretation. From one perspective, people who feel a soul may be experiencing access to a deeper dimension of reality. From another perspective, they may be experiencing common human emotions and thoughts that are interpreted through a spiritual framework. Because inner experiences cannot be directly observed from the outside, the question remains difficult to answer with certainty. It is possible that many people share similar internal experiences but describe them differently. A moment of overwhelming love, a feeling of connection during meditation, or a powerful sense of purpose may be interpreted by one person as contact with the soul, while another person understands it as emotional awareness, psychological integration, or a meaningful brain state. The experience is real in the sense that it is genuinely felt, but the explanation attached to it depends on the individual's beliefs, personality, culture, and personal history. Two people may stand in the same emotional landscape while using completely different maps to describe where they are. Perhaps the most useful perspective is to recognize that the human consciousness contains many layers that are still not fully understood. The absence of the soul feeling does not necessarily prove that someone lacks depth, just as the presence of a soul feeling does not automatically prove a specific explanation for that experience. People encounter themselves in different ways. Some look inward and discover a spiritual presence, while others discover patterns, thoughts, values, and emotions without naming them as something separate. The mystery may not be why some people have souls and others do not, but why human beings experience the same experience through such different forms of awareness. Conclusion. The feeling of having a soul is one of the most personal and mysterious aspects of human experience. Some people describe it as an inner voice, a spiritual presence, a connection to something greater, or a deep awareness of who they truly are. Others move through life without experiencing that sensation and instead understand themselves through thoughts, emotions, memories, relationships, and actions. These differences reveal the incredible variety of human consciousness rather than a simple division between those who feel deeply and those who do not. The experience of the soul appears to be shaped by many forces working together: the structure of the brain, emotional sensitivity, childhood development, cultural influences, personality, intuition, trauma, and the human desire to create meaning. Each person develops a unique way of understanding their inner world. For some, the language of the soul provides the clearest expression of their deepest experiences. For others, different concepts such as identity, consciousness, purpose, or personal values capture the same search for understanding. Ultimately, the question may not be who has a soul and who does not. A more meaningful question may be how each person learns to recognize and interpret the hidden depths of their own existence. Some people discover themselves through spirituality, some through reason, some through creativity, and some through connection with others. The human journey is not defined by everyone reaching the same conclusion, but by the many ways people attempt to understand what it means to be alive. Whether the soul is a spiritual reality, a psychological experience, or a mystery still waiting to be explained, the search for it reveals something undeniable. Every human being carries an inner world worth exploring.